Senator Obama, thanks very much for joining us. Pretty exciting to come back to Iowa because a lot of people think this is where it all started for you.
Well, especially when it's 70 degrees outside in late October. I'm really happy to come back to Iowa.
It's warmer here than it is back in New York or Washington.
But no, it felt really good to see all these familiar faces. There were a bunch of people out here who signed up for our campaign when we had almost no money, very few endorsements. The polls weren't good for us, and a lot of these people took a chance. They came up and volunteered, put their names on my campaign. It felt really good to see all these familiar faces. There were a bunch of people out here who signed up for our campaign when we had almost no money, very few endorsements. The polls weren't good for us, and a lot of these people took a chance. They came up and volunteered, put their names on my campaign.
Iowa showed that a black man can really get a lot of white people's support.
Well, I think that's part of what it showed, but what it also showed, I think you'll remember, because you were watching, a lot of people were skeptical about young people coming out, about people who traditionally haven't participated in caucuses getting involved, and here's where we, I think, proved that we can get people much more engaged in the political process than they have been before.
Let's go through a whole bunch of substantive economic issues, foreign policy issues. I'm going to give you quick questions. If you can give me quick answers, I think we'll get through a lot. We got limited time, as you know. You want universal health care or something approaching universal health care. That's a top priority. Where is the money going to come from?
Well, we're going to have to cut back on some things that don't make sense right now. We're spending $15 billion a year, for example, under the Medicare program to subsidize insurance companies. We're going to have to cut from programs that don't work in order to provide health care. And as I've said before, we're going to roll back the Bush tax cuts on the wealthiest Americans, people making over $250,000 a year, especially millionaires and billionaires who've been making much more than that.
So in effect, that will pay for the health care?
That will pay for the health care.
What about the war in Iraq? You're going to want to stop that war as well, right?
The war in Iraq, we can achieve some significant savings. It's not going to come immediately. I've said I want a responsible drawdown. We're still going to have to reset our military. We're still going to have to deal with rising veterans costs. Post-traumatic stress disorder, for example, I think has been underdiagnosed. We've got to make sure treatment.
So the $12 billion the United States is spending a month right now on Iraq, that's going to go on at least for what, a year or a year and a half?
My hope is that we draw down that money over time is drastically reduced. But the point is that we're not going to be able to take that $12 billion and suddenly automatically apply it all to domestic stuff. We've got to take care of our troops, and we're still going to have expenditures in Afghanistan because we need to hunt down bin Laden and Al-Qaeda and put them finally out of business.
Senator McCain says pork barrel spending or earmarks. Will you make that same commitment?
You know, here's what I'll tell you. We're going to have to fundamentally change.
As if he's president, he will veto every piece of legislation that
change how our appropriations process works. And I want to sit down with members of Congress, should I be elected, even before I'm sworn in, and explain to them that some of these projects may be worthy projects in their home state, home district, but right now we can only do those things that are absolutely necessary. And if we're going to have a project, I think it has to be not just a whim of a particular local community. It's got to be something that serves to help build the overall economy and move us in a better direction.
At a time of economic crisis, as it is right now, the worst since the Great Depression, people want to know who you'll be surrounded with on these important decisions. Who do you think will be your Secretary of the Treasury?
Well, I'm not going to make that kind of news because...
Give me an example of the folks that you're thinking about.
I haven't won yet, but I'll tell you who is already part of my senior economic advisory group, because you've seen him. Paul Volcker, former Federal Reserve Board Chairman. Larry Summers, former Secretary of Treasury. Warren Buffett, who's been a great friend and a great advisor and talked to me a lot during this recent economic crisis. Those are the kinds of people that I expect will surround me, will help me make decisions, but it's getting ahead of ourselves for me to identify particular cabinet posts.
Will you raise the capital gains tax, the tax where people sell stocks or mutual funds, their 401ks? Right. Will you raise it from 15%, that capital gains tax?
I have said early in this campaign that it makes sense for us to go from 15 to 20%. Now, frankly, people aren't experiencing a lot of capital gains right now. People are having a lot of capital losses. But I've talked to people like Warren Buffett and asked him will that modest increase in the capital gains tax have an impact on the real economy, on investment, on business growth? And he assures me that's not going to be an impediment to capital formation and us being able to move forward on the economy.
Will middle-class families be exempted from that increase in capital gains tax?
Well, what I've said is small businesses are going to be exempted, and anybody who's making less than $250,000 a year, I've said they're not going to get their capital gains tax increase.
So they will be exempted.
They will be exempted from that, as well as any income tax increase, any payroll tax increase. My attitude is that middle-class families need a tax cut, and 95% of American families and workers are going to get reduced taxes. In fact, there was an article today in the New York Times that laid out in very stark terms the fact that I give much more tax relief to middle-class families than John McCain does.
At a time of economic distress, is it wise to increase the corporate tax rate?
Well, we're not increasing the corporate tax rate.
I know, but there's some talk that you want to increase it. It's 35% right now. You've talked about that.
Where's that talk coming from?
I don't know. I mean, you tell me. You want to keep it at 35%?
I have no plans for increasing the corporate tax rate. And in fact, you can make an argument for lowering the corporate tax rate, but only if you, at the same time, close all the corporate loopholes. The problem we have right now is, on paper, we've got a high corporate tax rate. In actual terms, corporations aren't paying their fair share.
ExxonMobil will still pay 35%, is that right?
ExxonMobil will still pay 35%, although I've talked about previously the idea that we should have a windfall profits tax, similar to the one that Sarah Palin imposed on oil companies to benefit Alaska.